The scorching July sun beat down on Abigail Jennings as she struggled against the iron grip of the two men dragging her across the dusty platform of Julesburg, Colorado's train station. Her chestnut hair, once elegantly pinned, now fell in disarray around her tear-streaked face. "Please," she begged, her voice hoarse from hours of pleading. "I'm not mad. You can't do this." The taller of the two men, Dr. Edmund Hargrove, tightened his grip on her arm. "Mrs. Jennings, you've been deemed mentally unsound. This is for your own good." The other man, Sheriff Thomas Wilson, looked uncomfortable but maintained his hold. "Doc's right, madam. After what happened with your husband, the town council's decided. The asylum in Denver will help you." Abigail's heart pounded against her ribs like a caged bird. 6 months ago, her husband William had died under suspicious circumstances. The official ruling was suicide, but Abigail had insisted he'd been murdered. Her persistent claims had eventually led to this being forcibly removed to an asylum for the insane. The black steam engine waited like an ominous beast, smoke billowing from its stack, ready to carry her away to a fate worse than death. She'd heard the whispered stories about the Denver Territorial Asylum, the ice baths, the restraints, the patients who were never seen again. As they approached the passenger car, a tall figure suddenly materialized before the door. Broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, the man stood with his boots planted firmly on the platform, thumbs hooked in his belt. His face was partially shadowed by a well-worn Stetson, but his eyes, piercing blue and unwavering, were fixed on the trio. "She's not going," he stated, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. The sheriff faltered. "Isaiah Reed, this ain't your business." Isaiah Reed shifted slightly, revealing the gleam of a silver star pinned to his leather vest. "U.S. Marshal Service makes it my business, Sheriff." Dr. Hargrove puffed up indignantly. "This woman has been legally committed to the Territorial Asylum by order of Judge Morrison." "Stand aside, Marshal." Isaiah didn't move. "Those papers in your pocket, Doc, they forged." "Certainly not," Hargrove sputtered. "Then you won't mind if I take a look," Isaiah said, extending his hand. The doctor hesitated, then reached into his jacket with his free hand, producing an official-looking document. Isaiah took it, scanning the contents while maintaining his position blocking the train door. "Signed yesterday by Judge Morrison, is that right?" Isaiah asked casually. "Yes, as you can plainly see," Hargrove replied with growing impatience. Isaiah's eyes met Abigail's for a brief moment, and she saw something there: recognition, perhaps, or simple human compassion. "That's mighty interesting," Isaiah said, folding the paper and tucking it into his own vest. "Considering Judge Morrison has been in Denver for the past week. I just received a telegram from him this morning." The blood drained from Dr. Hargrove's face. Sheriff Wilson loosened his grip on Abigail's arm. "Ed, what's he talking about?" "He's lying," Hargrove hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. The conductor called from further down the platform. "All aboard. 5 minutes to departure." Isaiah's hand moved to rest meaningfully on his holstered revolver. "Mrs. Jennings isn't going anywhere today, gentlemen. Now, we can discuss this civilly at the sheriff's office, or we can make a scene. Your choice." Abigail felt the sheriff's grip fall away entirely. "I think we'd better sort this out proper-like, Ed," Wilson said quietly. With a snarl, Hargrove shoved Abigail forward, sending her stumbling into Isaiah's solid frame. In one fluid motion, the marshal steadied her while drawing his revolver, training it on the doctor. "That was poorly considered," Isaiah said evenly. "Sheriff, I suggest you take your friend here into custody until we get to the bottom of this." As Wilson reluctantly handcuffed a protesting Hargrove, Isaiah gently guided Abigail away from the train. She was trembling so badly she could hardly stand. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching his arm for support. "But how did you know?" Isaiah's expression remained impassive, but his eyes softened slightly. "Let's get you somewhere safe first, Mrs. Jennings. Then we'll talk." As they walked away from the station, Abigail glanced back at the train that had nearly carried her to a nightmare. The engine released a mournful whistle as it began pulling away from the platform without its intended passenger. Isaiah led her to a modest building with a hand-painted sign reading Marshal's office. Once inside, he gestured to a wooden chair beside a pot-bellied stove. "Sit. Rest." He poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink this." Her hand still shook as she accepted the cup. "They were going to lock me away forever," she murmured. "Not while I'm around," Isaiah replied, removing his hat and placing it on the desk. Without the shadow of the brim, his features were clearer, a strong jaw covered with a few days' stubble, lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun, and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "You said you knew Judge Morrison was in Denver," Abigail said after taking a sip of water, "but that doesn't explain how you knew I needed help." Isaiah settled into the chair behind his desk. "I've been watching Dr. Hargrove for some time now. You're not the first widow he's tried to commit after a convenient death." Abigail's breath caught. "Then, you believe me about William?" "I believe something's not right," Isaiah said carefully. "And I believe you deserve better than being railroaded to an asylum on false papers." "My husband was murdered, Marshal Reed," Abigail stated firmly. "I found him with a bullet in his chest and his gun in his right hand. And the problem with that being, William was left-handed," she said simply. "Always had been. Couldn't even hold a pen in his right hand without fumbling it." Isaiah's expression sharpened with interest. "Why didn't this come up during the inquest?" "It did. I told Sheriff Wilson. I told the coroner. Nobody listened." Bitterness crept into her voice. "William had recently changed his will to leave everything to me instead of his brother Richard. A week later, he's dead, and I'm being called hysterical for questioning it." Isaiah nodded slowly. "And Richard Jennings is a close associate of Dr. Hargrove's, I presume. They're practically joined at the hip. Richard's also on the town council that approved my commitment." Abigail's voice cracked on the last word. "Mrs. Jennings, please call me Abigail," she interrupted. "After what you've done for me today, I think we can dispense with formalities." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Abigail, then. I need to know everything about your husband's death and what's happened since. But first, we need to find you safe lodging. Richard Jennings won't take kindly to his plans being disrupted." "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "After William died, I stayed in our home, but Richard claimed it belonged to him through some business arrangement. I've been staying at Mrs. Parker's boarding house, but my room is paid only through tomorrow." Isaiah considered this for a moment. "There's a widow named Clara Hayes who runs a small ranch outside town. She sometimes takes in women who need a place to stay. I think you'd be safe there while I investigate." "Why are you helping me?" Abigail asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Isaiah's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "I know injustice when I see it, and I've seen what happens to women sent to that asylum on false pretenses." A shadow passed over his face. "They don't come back the same if they come back at all." Something in his tone suggested personal knowledge, but Abigail knew better than to pry. Instead, she simply nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he replied, standing and retrieving his hat. "We've got a long road ahead and powerful enemies, but first let's get you to Clara's." The journey to Clara Hayes' ranch took them along a winding trail that led away from the bustle of Julesburg. Abigail rode behind Isaiah on his sturdy bay gelding, her arms wrapped tentatively around his waist. The solid warmth of him was reassuring after the terror of the morning. As they crested a small rise, a modest homestead came into view, a weathered but well-maintained cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, a barn, and several corrals holding horses. A woman in a practical dress and apron was hanging washing on a line. Clara Hayes turned out to be a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with silver-streaked auburn hair and shrewd eyes that seemed to take Abigail's measure in an instant. "Another one, Isaiah?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "She needs a safe place, Clara," Isaiah replied. "They tried to take her on false papers." Clara's expression hardened. "Hargrove again?" Isaiah nodded. "Well, come in then," Clara said, gesturing toward the cabin. "I just made fresh bread and you look like you could use something to steady you, child." Once inside, over warm bread and strong coffee, Isaiah explained Abigail's situation. Clara listened attentively, occasionally shooting sympathetic glances at Abigail. "You can stay in my spare room as long as you need," Clara said when Isaiah finished. "I could use the help around here anyway." She gave Abigail a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about payment for now. I can work," Abigail insisted. "I'm not afraid of hard labor." "Good," Clara replied approvingly, "because ranch work is plenty hard, but first you need rest. You look dead on your feet." Isaiah rose to leave. "I'll ride back to town, start making inquiries about your husband's death. Clara will keep you safe." "Marshal Reed," Abigail began. "Isaiah," he corrected quietly. "Isaiah," she amended. "Thank you again. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there today." A muscle tightened in his jaw. "I know exactly what would have happened, and I couldn't let that be your fate." After Isaiah departed, Clara showed Abigail to a small but clean room with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the corrals. "It's not much," Clara said apologetically. "It's perfect," Abigail replied honestly. After spending months in fear of being dragged away at any moment, the simple room felt like a sanctuary. That night, Abigail slept deeply for the first time since William's death. The exhaustion of constant vigilance, compounded by the day's events, pulled her into dreamless slumber. She woke to pale dawn light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee brewing. For a disorienting moment, she didn't recognize her surroundings. Then the previous day's memories rushed back: the train station, the marshal's intervention, the escape to this ranch. After dressing in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday, the only ones she had, Abigail made her way to the kitchen. Clara was already busy at the stove, turning slices of bacon in a cast-iron pan. "Good morning," Clara greeted. "Coffee's ready if you want some. Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Abigail admitted, pouring herself a cup from the pot on the stove. "Thank you for taking me in." "Been in your shoes," Clara said matter-of-factly. "Not exactly the same circumstances, but I know what it's like to have men deciding your fate without your say-so." As they ate breakfast, Clara explained the routine of the ranch: feeding the chickens and horses, milking the cow, tending the vegetable garden, and other daily chores. "I sell eggs and vegetables in town," Clara explained, "and board a few horses for folks who don't have the space. It's enough to keep me going since my Samuel passed 5 years back." Abigail was about to respond when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both look toward the window. Clara visibly relaxed when she recognized the rider. "Isaiah's back already," she observed. "Must have news." Isaiah looked grim as he entered the cabin, declining Clara's offer of breakfast with a shake of his head. "I spoke with Sheriff Wilson last night after he locked up Hargrove. The doctors claiming he was acting on Richard Jennings' authority as a town councilman." "And the forged papers?" Abigail asked. "Hargrove insists the judge signed them before leaving for Denver and backdated them. Wilson isn't sure what to believe." Isaiah removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. But I sent a telegram to Judge Morrison in Denver. Should have a response today or tomorrow. What about William's death? Abigail pressed. Isaiah's expression darkened further. I reviewed the inquest documents. There was no mention of your husband being left-handed, Abigail. The entry about the gun placement specifically notes it was found in the deceased's dominant hand. That's a lie, Abigail exclaimed. I told them repeatedly. There were witnesses, people in town who knew William Roach did everything with his left hand. I believe you, Isaiah said quietly. And I think I know why the record was falsified. The coroner at the time was Benjamin Marks. He retired suddenly a week after your husband's inquest and moved to California. Very convenient timing. And a very convenient retirement fund, I'd wager, Clara remarked dryly. Indeed. Isaiah took a seat at the table. I also did some discreet asking around about Richard Jennings. Seems he's deep in debt to some unsavory characters in Denver. Gambling debts, mostly. Abigail's hands clenched around her coffee cup. So he needed William's money, badly enough to kill his own brother. It's a strong motive, Isaiah agreed, but proving it is another matter. Right now, our priority is ensuring your safety and clearing your name. If Hargrove and Richard Jennings convince people you're mentally unstable, anything you say about William's death will be dismissed. What can I do? Abigail asked, determination hardening her voice. Stay here with Clara. Keep out of sight. Isaiah's blue eyes were intense as they met hers. Let me handle this. It's what I do. What you do? Abigail echoed, a question in her tone. Clara chuckled softly. Isaiah's made quite a reputation for himself, dealing with corrupt officials and solving cases others can't or won't. The righteous marshal, some call him. A flush of embarrassment touched Isaiah's weathered cheeks. I just do what needs doing. He stood abruptly, replacing his hat. I should get back to town. I'll return when I have more information. After he left, Abigail turned to Clara. Has he always been a marshal? Clara's expression grew somber. Not always. He was a doctor during the war, saw things no man should have to see. Came west afterward looking for something, though I don't think even he knew what. She paused, considering how much to say. About 5 years ago, his sister was committed to that Denver asylum on false accusations from her husband who wanted her inheritance. By the time Isaiah got her out 3 months later, she wasn't the same. Took her own life a year after. Abigail's hand flew to her mouth. That's horrible. It changed him. He joined the marshals and made it his mission to prevent similar injustices. Clara gave Abigail a meaningful look. So when I say he'll help you, you can believe it. This isn't just another case to him. Over the following days, Abigail settled into life at the ranch. The physical labor was exhausting but welcome. It left her too tired to dwell on her fears and gave her a sense of purpose she'd been lacking. Clara proved to be good company, practical and straightforward but kind. Isaiah visited every other day, bringing supplies and news. Judge Morrison had confirmed by telegram that he had signed no commitment papers for Abigail, which forced Sheriff Wilson to release Dr. Hargrove with a warning. Richard Jennings had filed a formal complaint against Isaiah for interfering with medical treatment, but the marshal seemed unconcerned. Richard's making noise, but without those fraudulent papers, he doesn't have a leg to stand on, Isaiah explained during one visit. Still, he's persuasive, and he's convinced some folks in town that you're dangerous and delusional. What about William's murder? Abigail asked. Isaiah's expression was cautious. I'm making progress, but slowly. I've located 2 witnesses who'll testify that your husband was left-handed, which contradicts the official record. And I've been looking into Richard's finances. There's definitely something suspicious there. As the days turned into weeks, Abigail noticed subtle changes in Isaiah. His visits lasted longer, and sometimes they had nothing to do with her case. He would simply sit on Clara's porch in the evening, sharing coffee or a meal, occasionally telling stories about his travels as a marshal. Abigail found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. There was something steadying about Isaiah's presence, a quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time since William's death. One evening in early August, as they sat watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Isaiah surprised her by asking about her life before William's death. "We had a good marriage," Abigail said thoughtfully. "Not passionate, perhaps, but comfortable. William was kind, if somewhat distant. We never had children, though we tried." A shadow of old grief passed over her face, and before William, Isaiah prompted gently. "I grew up in Philadelphia. My father was a professor of literature. He believed in educating his daughters as well as his sons, which was unusual." A fond smile touched her lips. "I came west as a schoolteacher when I was 20. That's how I met William. He was on the school board." Isaiah nodded, studying her profile in the fading light. "You miss teaching?" It wasn't a question, but Abigail answered anyway. "Yes, very much. There's nothing quite like seeing a child's face light up when they finally understand something new." They fell silent, the evening peaceful around them. In the distance, a coyote called mournfully to the rising moon. "Isaiah," Abigail said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "What happens if you can't prove William was murdered? Will I have to live in hiding forever?" His eyes, when they met hers, were resolute. "I won't let that happen." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders made them both tense. Isaiah was on his feet in an instant, hand moving to his revolver. "Get inside," he ordered quietly. "Wake Clara." Abigail hurried into the cabin, heart pounding. She found Clara already awake, a shotgun in her hands. "Trouble?" the older woman asked tersely. "Riders coming," Abigail replied. "Isaiah's outside." Clara nodded, moving to a window where she could see the yard while remaining hidden. "4 men," she reported grimly. "And that's Richard Jennings at the front." Abigail's blood ran cold. She peered carefully around the edge of the curtain, recognizing her brother-in-law's stocky form. Richard had never liked her, viewing her as an interloper who had come between him and his brother. After William changed his will to favor Abigail, Richard's dislike had curdled into something uglier. Outside, Isaiah stood on the porch, his stance casual but alert as the riders approached. Even in the dim light, Abigail could make out the gleam of his marshal's badge. "Evening, gentlemen," Isaiah called as they reined in their horses. "You're a long way from town." Richard Jennings dismounted, his round face flushed with anger or exertion. "We've come for the woman, Marshal. This has gone on long enough." "Mrs. Jennings is under my protection," Isaiah replied evenly. "Protection?" Richard spat. "You're harboring a dangerous lunatic. She murdered my brother, and now she's poisoned your mind against me with her wild accusations." One of the other men, whom Abigail recognized as the town blacksmith, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Marshal, we just want this settled proper. If she's innocent, let her come back to town and prove it. Like she was given a chance to prove it when you tried to ship her to an asylum on forged papers." Isaiah's voice remained calm, but with an edge of steel. "No, I don't think so. If you have legitimate concerns, bring them to the territorial court. Until then, Mrs. Jennings stays where she is, safe from those who would harm her." Richard's face contorted with rage. "You have no right. She's my responsibility now that William's gone." "She's a grown woman, not property to be claimed," Isaiah countered. "Now, I suggest you all head back to town before this becomes official Marshal's business." For a tense moment, Abigail feared Richard would refuse. His hand hovered near his hip where she knew he carried a revolver. But apparently, even in his anger, he wasn't foolish enough to draw against a U.S. Marshal. "This isn't over," Richard snarled, remounting his horse. "She can't hide forever." "No one's hiding," Isaiah replied. "Justice is simply taking its time. Good night, gentlemen." After the riders departed, Isaiah came inside, his expression troubled. "They'll be back," he said. "And next time they might have legal papers, real ones. Richard has influence, and there are judges who might be persuaded if he tells a convincing story." "What do we do?" Abigail asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. Isaiah's gaze was determined. "We move up our timeline. I've been building a case carefully, but we need to force the issue now. Tomorrow, I'm going to confront Dr. Hargrove directly. He's the weak link, always has been." "That's risky," Clara observed. "Men like Hargrove are dangerous when cornered." "I'm counting on it," Isaiah replied grimly. "Sometimes you have to shake the tree to see what falls out." That night, sleep eluded Abigail. She lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the ranch and thinking about Isaiah's plan. The thought of him confronting Hargrove alone filled her with dread. The doctor had already demonstrated his willingness to break the law. What else might he be capable of by dawn? She had made a decision. When Isaiah arrived later that morning, prepared to ride to town, Abigail was waiting for him, dressed in her best and only dress, her hair neatly pinned. "I'm coming with you," she announced. Isaiah shook his head immediately. "Too dangerous. Richard and his friends are looking for any excuse to get their hands on you." "I'm tired of hiding," Abigail countered. "This is my life, my husband's murder. I should be part of bringing the truth to light." Clara, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "The girl's right, Isaiah. Besides, your plan might work better with her there. Hargrove won't expect it might rattle him enough to make a mistake." Isaiah looked between the two women, clearly outnumbered. "If you come," he said finally to Abigail, "you follow my lead. If I say run, you run. If I say hide, you hide. Understood?" "Understood," she agreed, relief and apprehension mingling in her chest. The ride to town was tense, neither of them speaking much. Abigail could sense Isaiah's concern in the rigid set of his shoulders as she rode behind him, her arms around his waist. Julesburg looked much the same as it had a month ago when she'd been dragged to the train station. The same dusty main street lined with wooden buildings. The same townsfolk going about their business. A few people stopped to stare as Isaiah and Abigail rode past, recognizing the woman who was supposed to be locked away in an asylum. They dismounted in front of a white clapboard building with a shingle that read, "Dr. E. Hargrove, Physician and Surgeon." Isaiah helped Abigail down, then secured his horse to the hitching post. "Ready?" he asked, his blue eyes searching her face. Abigail nodded, straightening her shoulders. "Ready." The front office was empty except for a young woman behind a desk, Hargrove's nurse and receptionist, Miss Lily Parker. Miss Parker's eyes widened when she saw Abigail. "Mrs. Jennings, we heard you'd left town." "Not willingly," Abigail replied coolly. "Is the doctor in?" "He's with a patient," Miss Parker stammered, looking nervously between Abigail and Isaiah. "But I'll tell him you're here when he's finished." "We'll wait," Isaiah said, guiding Abigail to a bench against the wall. They didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, the inner door opened and Dr. Hargrove emerged with a patient, Mrs. Collins, the baker's wife. "Mrs." Collins froze when she saw Abigail, her expression a mixture of shock and uncertainty. "Abigail Jennings," she gasped. "But I thought—" "Whatever you thought was wrong, Mrs. Collins," Abigail said quietly. "As you can see, I'm perfectly sane and well." Dr. Hargrove's face had drained of color. "Mrs. Collins, we'll continue your treatment next week. You can settle your account with Miss Parker." After Mrs. Collins departed, casting curious glances over her shoulder, Hargrove attempted to retreat into his examination room. Isaiah was faster, stepping smoothly in front of the door. "We need to talk, Doctor," Isaiah said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable command. Hargrove glanced frantically at Miss Parker. "Lily, go fetch Sheriff Wilson." "Stay where you are, Miss Parker," Isaiah countered, flashing his marshal's badge. "This is federal business now." The young woman sank back into her chair, wide-eyed. "Shall we speak in your office, Doctor?" Isaiah suggested, though it wasn't really a question. Inside Hargrove's cluttered office, with its shelves of medical books and bottles of mysterious remedies, Isaiah wasted no time. "I know about the arrangement between you and Richard Jennings. I know you falsified the inquest report on William Jennings' death, and I know you attempted to have his widow committed on forged papers." Hargrove's initial fear was quickly replaced by indignation. "These are outrageous accusations. I've been a respected physician in this community for 15 years. And how much of Richard Jennings' money have you pocketed during those years?" Isaiah asked casually. "For falsifying documents, providing convenient medical opinions." "I don't have to listen to this," Hargrove blustered, making for the door. Isaiah didn't move to stop him physically, but his next words froze the doctor in place. "Benjamin Marks confessed." Hargrove turned slowly, his face ashen. "What?" "The former coroner," Isaiah clarified. "I tracked him to Sacramento. When presented with evidence of his misconduct, he was quite eager to cooperate in exchange for leniency. He provided a sworn statement about how you and Richard Jennings pressured him to falsify the inquest report specifically, to change the notation about which hand held the gun. It was a bluff. Isaiah hadn't found Marks yet, but Hargrove couldn't know that. The doctor sank into his chair, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Richard said it would be simple," Hargrove said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "William was depressed after their business troubles. Everyone would believe he took his own life. Except he didn't, did he?" Abigail pressed, unable to remain silent any longer. "Richard killed him for his money." Hargrove wouldn't meet her eyes. "I don't know who pulled the trigger. I only know Richard came to me afterward, said there had been an accident, but it needed to look like suicide for insurance purposes." "And the commitment papers?" Isaiah asked. "Was that Richard's idea too?" The doctor nodded miserably. "When Mrs. Jennings kept insisting her husband was murdered, Richard became worried she might convince someone to investigate further. He thought if she was declared insane, her claims would be dismissed. So you forged Judge Morrison's signature," Isaiah stated. "Richard provided the blank forms with the court seal. I just filled them in and signed the judge's name." Hargrove looked up finally, his expression pleading. "You have to understand my position. Richard Jennings has influence in this town. He could have ruined me. Instead, you chose to ruin an innocent woman's life," Isaiah replied coldly, "and helped cover up a murder." The sound of the outer door opening interrupted them. Heavy footsteps approached, and then Sheriff Wilson appeared in the doorway, hand resting on his holstered gun. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Miss Parker ran to get me, said there was trouble." Isaiah turned calmly. "No trouble, Sheriff. The doctor was just explaining his role in William Jennings' murder and the subsequent attempt to commit Mrs. Jennings on false pretenses." Wilson's eyes widened. "Is that true, Ed?" Hargrove seemed to collapse in on himself. "Richard Jennings is the one you want," he said weakly. "I just did what I was told." "I think you'd better come to my office," Wilson said after a moment. "All of you." As they walked down Julesburg's Main Street to the sheriff's office, Abigail was acutely aware of the stares following them. Word was spreading quickly. Mrs. Jennings had returned, and Dr. Hargrove was in some kind of trouble. In the sheriff's office, Hargrove repeated his confession, this time with Wilson recording it in his official ledger. The sheriff looked increasingly troubled as the doctor detailed the conspiracy. "So you're saying Richard Jennings murdered his own brother?" Wilson asked when Hargrove finished. "I'm saying Richard arranged for William's death to look like suicide," Hargrove clarified carefully. "I don't know who actually fired the shot, but you know it wasn't suicide," Isaiah pressed. Hargrove nodded reluctantly. The position of the body, the angle of the wound. It would have been nearly impossible for William to shoot himself that way, especially with his non-dominant hand. "I need to bring Richard in for questioning," Wilson said, rising from his desk. "And I'll need to telegraph the district attorney in Denver." "I'll come with you to find Richard," Isaiah offered. "He may not come quietly." "What about me?" Abigail asked. Isaiah exchanged a look with the sheriff. "It would be safer if you stayed here," he said gently. "I've spent weeks hiding," Abigail replied firmly. "I won't cower in the sheriff's office while you confront the man who had my husband killed and tried to bury me alive in that asylum." Wilson looked uncomfortable, but Isaiah nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Stay behind us," he conceded. Richard Jennings wasn't at his office or his home. They finally found him at the Rusty Spur Saloon, drinking whiskey at a corner table with two other men from the town council. The saloon fell silent as Isaiah, Sheriff Wilson, and Abigail entered. Women weren't common in such establishments, especially respectable widows like Abigail Jennings. But she held her head high, ignoring the whispers that followed her. Richard spotted them immediately, his face flushing with anger when he saw Abigail. "What is she doing here?" he demanded loudly. "Has everyone forgotten she's dangerously unstable? The only dangerous person here is you, Richard," Abigail replied, her voice carrying in the hushed room. "Dr. Hargrove has confessed everything." Richard's face went from red to pale in an instant. "Hargrove doesn't know what he's talking about. He's been drinking too much of his own medicines. He seemed clear-headed enough when he described how you arranged to make William's murder look like suicide," Isaiah said evenly, "and how you planned to silence Mrs. Jennings by having her committed." Richard surged to his feet, sending his chair crashing backward. "This is absurd. Will you listen to these wild accusations, gentlemen?" He appealed to his companions, who were watching the confrontation with growing discomfort. "Richard Jennings, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of William Jennings and conspiracy to commit fraud," Sheriff Wilson announced formally, stepping forward with handcuffs. With a roar of rage, Richard flipped the table, sending glasses shattering across the floor. In the chaos, he drew a small derringer from his vest pocket and aimed it directly at Abigail. "This is all your fault," he snarled. "You should have gone to that asylum like a good little widow." Time seemed to slow. Abigail saw Richard's finger tightening on the trigger, saw Isaiah moving to place himself between her and the gun, saw Sheriff Wilson reaching for his own weapon. Then a shot rang out, but not from Richard's derringer. The saloon keeper, a taciturn man named Frank Murphy, had produced a shotgun from behind the bar and fired a warning blast into the ceiling. "Not in my establishment," Murphy growled as plaster dust rained down. The distraction was enough. Isaiah closed the distance to Richard in 2 long strides, disarming him with a swift, practiced motion that left the smaller man gasping in pain as his wrist was twisted. "That was a poor decision," Isaiah said quietly, securing the derringer and handing it to Sheriff Wilson. "Add attempted murder to the charges, Sheriff." As Wilson handcuffed a now subdued Richard, Isaiah turned to Abigail, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her heart was racing. "He would have shot me." "But he didn't," Isaiah reminded her gently. And now he never will. The following days were a whirlwind. Richard Jennings was held in the Julesburg jail while the territorial prosecutor was summoned from Denver. Dr. Hargrove, in exchange for a reduced sentence, provided a detailed statement about his involvement in covering up William's murder and the plot to commit Abigail. Most importantly for Abigail, William's body was exhumed, and a new examination conducted by an impartial doctor brought in from Cheyenne. The findings confirmed what Abigail had maintained all along: the angle of the bullet wound, and the powder burns were inconsistent with suicide, particularly for a left-handed man. 1 week after Richard's arrest, Abigail stood in Sheriff Wilson's office as he officially apologized for his role in her ordeal. "I should have listened to you from the start, Mrs. Jennings," the sheriff said uncomfortably. "I let Richard's position in town cloud my judgment. I hope you can forgive me." "In time, perhaps," Abigail replied honestly. "But right now, I'm more concerned with reclaiming my life and my husband's property, which Richard has been controlling." "The judge has already ruled on that," Isaiah said from where he leaned against the wall. "Richard's claim to your home has been invalidated. You can move back in whenever you're ready." The thought of returning to the house where William had died filled Abigail with mixed emotions. Relief at having a home again, certainly, but also dread at the memories that would surely haunt those rooms. "I'm not sure I want to live there again," she admitted. "Too many ghosts." Isaiah studied her thoughtfully. "You could sell it, start fresh somewhere else." The idea was tempting, but Abigail shook her head. "Julesburg is my home. Despite everything that's happened, I still feel connected to this place." She paused, a new thought occurring to her. "Perhaps I could teach again. The school could use a second teacher from what I've heard." "I think that's a fine idea," Sheriff Wilson said, seeming relieved at the change of subject. "The town board will be looking to fill some vacant seats soon too, with Richard and his friends facing charges. Your experience would be valuable." After leaving the sheriff's office, Isaiah walked Abigail to Clara's wagon. The older woman had come into town to sell her eggs and vegetables, and Abigail would return to the ranch with her for now. "Thank you," Abigail said, stopping before they reached the wagon, "for everything. I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be free without you." Isaiah looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I just did what needed doing." "No," Abigail insisted. "You did what no one else was willing to do. You believed me when everyone else dismissed me as hysterical or worse." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "To be fair, I had my suspicions about Richard and Hargrove before I ever met you. You just confirmed what I already suspected. Even so." Abigail hesitated, then impulsively reached up and kissed his cheek. "You saved my life, Isaiah Reed." A flush spread across his weathered face, and he cleared his throat. "Will you be staying at Clara's much longer, a week or two, until I decide what to do with William's house?" Abigail studied his expression, trying to read the thoughts behind those guarded blue eyes. "Will you be moving on soon? Now that the case is solved." "I have some business to finish in Denver," Isaiah said slowly. "Testifying against Richard and Hargrove when their cases go to trial. But after that, I'm not sure." Something in his tone gave Abigail courage. "Perhaps you could consider staying in Julesburg. The town could use a lawman of your caliber." "I go where I'm needed," Isaiah replied, but his eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. "And sometimes, I suppose, where I want to be." The next month passed in a blur of activity. Richard Jennings and Dr. Hargrove were transferred to Denver to await trial. Abigail decided to sell William's house, their house, and used part of the proceeds to purchase a small cottage near the school. The town board, eager to make amends for their treatment of her, promptly hired her as the school's second teacher. Isaiah traveled to Denver to testify at the preliminary hearings, but returned to Julesburg afterward, taking up temporary residence in a room above the marshal's office. He never explicitly said he was staying permanently, but as weeks turned into months with no mention of leaving, Abigail dared to hope. They fell into a comfortable routine. Isaiah would often walk Abigail home after school, and they would share coffee on her porch, talking about their days. Sometimes he would bring a book. He had a surprising fondness for poetry, and read aloud as the sun set over the distant mountains. Abigail found herself looking forward to these quiet evenings more than anything else in her new life. Isaiah was different from William in nearly every way, more reserved, certainly, but also more present. When he looked at her, she felt truly seen. The first snow of winter was falling gently when Isaiah arrived at her cottage one evening in late November, a small package tucked under his arm. Abigail welcomed him in from the cold, taking his snow-dusted hat and coat. "I brought you something," he said, holding out the package wrapped in brown paper and string. Curious, Abigail unwrapped it to find a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "I thought perhaps you might want to write down your story someday," Isaiah explained. "What happened with William and Richard, how you fought for the truth. It might help others women in similar situations." Abigail was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you. I'll certainly consider it." They settled by the fire with cups of hot cider, the snow outside creating a cocoon of quiet around the little cottage. Isaiah seemed unusually pensive, staring into the flames. "I received a letter today," he said finally, "from the marshal's office in Cheyenne. They've offered me a permanent position there." Abigail's heart sank, though she tried not to let it show. "That's a fine opportunity," she said carefully. "When would you leave?" "I haven't accepted yet." His eyes met hers, more open than she'd ever seen them. "I wanted to talk to you first." "Me?" Abigail's pulse quickened. "Why would my opinion matter for your career decision?" Isaiah set down his cup and leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Because in these past months, you've come to matter a great deal to me, Abigail, more than I expected, more than I thought possible after everything." Abigail scarcely dared breathe. "What are you saying, Isaiah?" "I'm saying that I find myself reluctant to leave Julesburg. Or more accurately, reluctant to leave you." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from the usually composed Marshal. "I know it may be too soon after William. I know you may not feel the same, but I would regret not speaking before making my decision." Abigail's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. It was indeed less than a year since William's death, and propriety dictated a full mourning period. Yet her marriage had ended in truth long before Richard's bullet found William's heart. And what she felt for Isaiah was unlike anything she'd experienced with her husband, deeper, truer somehow. "It's not too soon," she said softly. "Not for how I feel." Something like hope flickered in Isaiah's eyes. "And how is that exactly?" Instead of answering with words, Abigail moved to sit beside him on the sofa. Slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wished, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. For a heartbeat, he remained still, and Abigail feared she had misunderstood. Then his hand came up to cradle her face, and he was returning her kiss with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I should decline that position in Cheyenne," he murmured. Abigail laughed softly. "I would very much prefer that you did." "Julesburg needs a marshal of its own," Isaiah mused. "With all the trouble this town has seen lately, I could make a case to the federal office." "A very compelling case, I'm sure," Abigail agreed, her fingers lightly tracing the line of his jaw. Outside, The snow continued to fall, blanketing Julesburg in pristine white. Inside the cozy cottage, Abigail Jennings and Isaiah Reed began to plan a future neither of them had imagined possible just months earlier. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers across the Colorado prairie. Abigail's school term was coming to an end, her students preparing for their examinations with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Isaiah had officially been appointed as Julesburg's permanent marshal, with a new silver star that gleamed on his vest. Richard Jennings and Dr. Hargrove had both been convicted Richard of murder and conspiracy, sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. Hargrove of multiple counts of fraud and false imprisonment, receiving 5 years. The trials had brought closure for Abigail, allowing her to finally put the past to rest. One warm May evening, Isaiah took Abigail riding along the South Platte River. They stopped at a picturesque spot where the river widened, forming a peaceful pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. "It's beautiful here," Abigail remarked, enjoying the play of late afternoon sunlight on the water. "I thought you might like it," Isaiah replied, helping her down from her horse. He spread a blanket on the grass and produced a small basket of food, bread, cheese, and fresh strawberries from Clara's garden. As they ate, Isaiah seemed distracted, repeatedly reaching into his pocket as if checking for something. Finally, Abigail placed her hand over his. "What's troubling you?" she asked. "You've been fidgeting since we arrived." Isaiah took a deep breath. "Nothing's troubling me, quite the opposite." He shifted to face her directly. "Abigail, when I came to Julesburg, I was still carrying the weight of my failure to save my sister. I thought if I could prevent other women from suffering her fate, perhaps I could find some peace." Abigail nodded, understanding. He had told her about his sister months ago, sharing the pain that had driven him to become a marshal. "What I never expected," Isaiah continued, "was to find something more, someone who would help me see beyond the ghosts of the past to a possible future." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I'm not a man of many words, Abigail, but I know what I want. And that's a life with you if you'll have me." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Abigail Jennings, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Isaiah Reed, I will." Their wedding took place in July 1874, a simple ceremony in Julesburg's small church. Clara Hayes stood as Abigail's witness, beaming with pride. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, eager to share in the happy ending to a story that had begun with such tragedy. As Marshal and Mrs. Reed danced under paper lanterns strung across the town square, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the terrifying day on the train platform when Isaiah had blocked her path to the asylum and declared she's not going, to this night of joy and new beginnings. "What are you thinking?" Isaiah asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about fate," Abigail replied, smiling up at her husband. "If Richard hadn't tried to send me away that day, we might never have met." Isaiah's arms tightened around her waist. "I prefer to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." As they swayed to the music under the stars, Abigail Jennings Reed believed that with all her heart. 5 years later, the Reed family had grown. Isaiah and Abigail welcomed twin boys, Samuel and William, in their 2nd year of marriage, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years after. Isaiah continued to serve as Julesburg's marshal, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity that spread throughout the territory. Abigail divided her time between teaching and raising their children, finding fulfillment in both roles. They had built a comfortable home on the outskirts of town, with enough land for a few horses and a garden that was Abigail's pride and joy. In the evenings, the family would gather on the wide front porch, Isaiah smoking his pipe, Abigail reading stories to the children, the legacy of her professor father evident in her expressive narration. Clara Hayes remained a dear friend and honorary grandmother to the Reed children, until her peaceful passing in the winter of 1878. She left her small ranch to Abigail and Isaiah, who maintained it as a place of refuge for women in need, continuing Clara's tradition of offering shelter to those with nowhere else to turn. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting, Isaiah took Abigail back to the train station where he had blocked her path to the asylum. The old platform had been rebuilt after a fire, but the memories remained vivid. "I was so afraid that day," Abigail remembered, leaning against her husband's solid shoulder. "I thought my life was over." Isaiah kissed the top of her head. "Instead, it was just beginning." "For both of us," Abigail agreed, her hand finding his. Together, they watched as the evening train pulled into the station, no longer a symbol of fear but simply part of the rhythm of life in their frontier home. The sun set over Julesburg, painting the Colorado sky in shades of gold and pink, promising another beautiful day to come.